Hi, everyone. Welcome to Talks with Gallagher, where we have conversations that inspire and empower. Today, I'm so delighted to have Kim Gifford. She is a graduate of Global Awakening School of Supernatural Ministry. She is also ordained through the Apostolic Network of Global Awakening, and she has a master's degree from Vermont College at Norwich University in creative writing and religion, and is a graduate of Middlebury College with a bachelor's degree in religion. She is also a writer and a writing coach with her special interest in encouraging people to share their stories and testimonies in their writing. She's also the founder of 1720 Ministries, named after John 17:20. I am praying not only for these disciples, but also for all who will believe in me through their message. Yet another encouragement to share our testimonies. And we met many years ago when I was working at Global Awakening as a video producer. And so I'm just so just delighted to have you on with us, Kim, on Talks with Gallagher.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so happy to do this. So I've been looking forward to it as well.
Yes, me too. Yes. Yeah, we had some scheduling dynamics, but this finally worked out for us. So, first off, can you share just a little bit more about your testimony for those that don't know you and in your journey with God up to this point?
Yeah, and it's a good place to start because it's kind of what I was always interested in writing, but really having this healing experience. I've known God my whole life, so honestly, couldn't even tell you the time I was saved because literally my mom was talking to me about God from the time I was a little baby, and I just grew up knowing that Jesus loved me, that He saved me, and so always knew Him, but really got this compulsion to share my story after going through this healing experience. And so after I finished my college, Middlebury College, I started having real blurriness in my eyes. I
Mm.
thought they were tired. It was actually around this time of year and
Oh, wow.
Christmas time. And so I was writing a lot of Christmas cards and I thought, oh, my vision's just tired. And so we happened to be over at this hospital for something else. And I just said, I'm going to run into the eye doctor. And I went in and I said, I'm having kind of flashes of light and my eyes seem really tired. And as soon as I said flashes of light, they took me right in. And the doctor said, let me see your eyes. And he looked at me and he said, this is probably a brain tumor. And I'm like, what? Totally shocked. He's like, we've got to get you to Hitchcock Hospital. You're going right now. We're getting an ambulance. It's about an hour away. And before I did that, I ran into my primary care doctor and he said, there's something else it could be. It could be this thing called a pseudotumor cerebri, which is pressure behind the optic nerve, but you don't have an actual tumor there. And he said, that's easier to treat. He says, pray it's that. And it's funny because, I have no idea what this man's faith was, but he said, pray for this. And so, we rushed down to Hitchcock. They took me in. They immediately started doing lumbar punctures. So removing the fluid, spinal fluid.
Oh,
Yes,
wow.
I was really, really close to going blind. I guess the spinal fluid is supposed to be like at some level in the 20s, and mine was way, way up there. And so, in the hundreds.
Wow.
So it was really scary. And they usually treat it with spinal taps and lumbar punctures and with steroids. And I did not respond to any of the steroids at all. I wasn't getting any better. So they were talking about putting a shunt in my brain. And I was just terrified. And my mom would come in and she would read Psalm 91 to me. And there's the part in Psalm 91 that says, even with your eyes, you'll see the recompense of the wicked. And I really didn't understand what that meant, but I understood that if it says even with your eyes, you're gonna see. And so this wonderful intern, started doing extra research, and she found out that a medicine that I was on actually could contribute to this. And I hadn't told anyone I was on it. It was for my skin, so it's like a skin cream, Retin-A at the time, and I didn't think anything of it. And so I stopped that and was able to start responding to treatments. And so got better. And so that was wonderful. But about 15 years later, it all started to happen again. And
Oh,
so
my.
that's when I was like, well, wait, I'm not doing any of these things I was doing before. I'm not taking Retin-A. I'm not doing this. Why is this coming back? And so again, went to all sorts of specialists and they're like, we don't understand why your vision's changing so rapidly. It's likely this pseudotumor. Let's send you for an MRI to make sure it's not a brain tumor. it just, again, very, very frightening. And I went to this little church that's here in my town. We're a really small town in central Vermont. And there was an evangelist speaking. And I remember not really wanting to go. I remember my mom saying, "Don't you want to go?" And I'm like, I have this horrible thing with my eye. I don't know what's happening. I don't really want to go to church tonight. I can't see. And so she's like, "Let's just go." And so I went, and can't tell you much about what the evangelist said, but all of a sudden he kind of stopped his sermon and said, "You," and he pointed at me and he said, "You have a spirit of fear all over you." And
Mm.
when he said that, I went over in the spirit. I was slain in the spirit. So, fell over under God's power. And when I came back up, I could completely see. I mean, the vision that had been going, all
Wow.
the blurriness, the one eye I couldn't see out of the other. It was really bright lights. Was back to completely normal. And so literally went the next day to my doctor, and he examined me, did all the tests, and then he came in and he looked at me and he said, "What did you do? Go see a faith healer." And he's being sarcastic and joking. And I
Oh,
said, "As a matter of fact, I did." And then he stopped and he looked and he said, "Well, it worked." And
wow.
my vision went back to 2020 in that eye. I wear reading glasses now, but I have never had the problem again. And so that was many years ago now. But it just gave me such a desire to share that story, to share what God can do. And so I remember that evangelist at the time was doing these meetings where he'd go to Hawaii, and he was doing evangelistic services there, and he was trying to you know get the people to come out. And actually the part of Hawaii we went to is called Hana, and it's
Mm.
on the island of Maui, and it's very isolated. I mean, it's people drive there because of the Hana Road. It's all these twists and turns, and people love to go for that. But really, it's very similar to a real Hawaiian culture, what you'd expect. And there's really
Mm.
there's like a Catholic church and there's like a Buddhist temple. There's not a lot of, or at the time, there was not a lot of real, Christian churches there. And so we would come in and do these evangelistic services and leave and not come back for the next year. And these kids are, it's between Japan and the US. So lots of drugs flowing through, lots of, teenage pregnancies. So the girls tend to get pregnant. The guys, are doing drugs. I mean, it's a culture that really needed and God. And so we ended up eventually being able to establish a church there.
Mm.
And I think that's still going. I think different people have taken it over, but went there for 10 years with this evangelist and basically
Wow.
saw people's lives really change. So I'd go back every year for a couple of weeks. Saw this really main drug dealer who was on crystal meth and was, dealing really hard, saw his life transformed. He went on to
Wow.
Bible college. He's now evangelist over there.
Mm.
And, this big guy, big Hawaiian, looks like a sumo wrestler. But his life was completely transformed. And so we saw a
Mhm.
lot of that. So that was just phenomenal. And, but my going along with it just came from wanting to share what God had done and to be, seeing that God could do these things, just a hunger for more of his presence, more of sharing him, just that whole experience, which is what eventually led me on to global as well.
Oh, I was wondering.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
connecting
yeah,
those dots.
just wanted to do more. And when I was in Hawaii, there was definitely in one of these services just a call into ministry. And I didn't really understand because it wasn't something I'd always done writing. I'd always been a freelance writer from the time I graduated and
Mm.
stuff like that. So it wasn't like I was thinking of becoming a pastor or thinking of becoming an evangelist. Even though I was doing this evangelistic work, it wasn't something that was on my mind per se. But
Mm.
this call, and it's at this little church. It's called it's in Kianai, which is like halfway to Hana, and a beautiful stone church that has withstood all these like tsunamis and tropical storms, and just a
Mm.
beautiful place. And the the that the anointing was so strong that day that many people were in tears. Many people were going forward, and there was just this call: if you want to, be in ministry, if you want to serve God, come forward. And I found myself going forward,
Mm.
and I didn't really know what that would mean. That was like probably a couple of years before I went to global. But even when I went to global, and even though it was a ministry school, I had gone to GSI, which is their summer program,
Oh yeah.
and
Oh
had sort of one of those encounters where, Dr. Randy prayed for me, and I was, praying in tongues for like 9 hours afterwards, and just
yeah.
really, you know, moved to pray for all my whole family, everyone I knew. And so I just, again, like, this was wonderful. Let me go back to the school. And originally I was thinking, oh, I'll just do first year, and that's it. And, I went the whole 3 years, did my internship, but it was, again, not really understanding why I was going, but just seeking after God.
Mm.
And again, seeking to share. They had us, do your testimony in 3 minutes. They have you in second year prepare a sermon, and I just kept moving along in that direction, and eventually got ordained through their network. And I was preaching at a little church here in Vermont, and still am expecting that I'll be doing more preaching and more pastoring in the future. But right now I'm working with a ministry that is helping encourage people to write and share their stories. And so that's always been there, and that's always going to be one of the ways I feel God is working with me. So yeah.
Well, thanks for giving us that overview of your testimony and all that God has done through you and your journey. I'm sure you're just scratching the surface, but you you mentioned about doing ministry and all that, and you started 1720 Ministries, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so what led you to start that ministry?
So I've always been drawn to that passage in John 17, just because, they call it the high priestly prayer. And that's because,
Mm.
I guess, you see Jesus acting as the high priest. But to me, it was always seeing him at his innermost being. I mean, it seemed like when he's praying to his father, there's a part of him that's so much like us, that there's so much like the human aspect of him as well, although we
Mm.
see his high calling. And I loved that he wasn't just talking to those followers, that he's actually praying for all of us in the future, and he's praying about us. And it says there in 1720 that, I'm not just praying for these people, but I'm praying for all those who, you'll change because of their stories. You'll hear because of the word that they're spreading, which I know is the biblical word. But I also think those testimonies are so important because,
Mm.
it's very incarnational in the fact that God's giving flesh again to his power, to his ability. When he heals me, it's not just the blind man back there.
Mm.
He's healing me now, today. And so I have that story to add to all that he's done. And so I really felt strongly about establishing it and being able to equip others. One of the things that has been fascinating to me, because I, even before had established this as a ministry, I was teaching, and I was teaching in a secular capacity. And when I started to do this more as a ministry capacity, I started to realize that everybody, no matter who you talk to, secular, Christian, there's a desire to write, but a fear of expressing ourselves. It's
Mm.
making yourself vulnerable. It's making yourself, people have been criticized, as far back as school. They write an essay and they get the
Mm.
red pen on the paper. And so they think there's a right way. And, do I have my periods in the right place? And no one just realizes that they each have a voice. And so it was just
Mm.
helping, God gave you an innate voice. And yes, there's punctuation, there's grammar, but, that can all come later. Someone can help you fix that, but you have something to say, and you can say it and put it on the page, and someone can help fix that. But as I started to talk to the Christians, I saw that, gosh, what's wrong? Like, they seem even more inhibited than some of my secular students. And I couldn't
Mm.
quite understand that at first. And I really feel that there is such a desire of the enemy to keep Christians silent. There's such a desire
Mm.
to not have us share our testimonies, to not have us share our stories. There's such an issue of identity, not understanding who we are in Christ, and that
Mm.
that he created us for this. He, you know, one of the things that has always interested me way back when I was at Middlebury was I had a theology professor, and he said, there's something about the Judeo-Christian tradition that's so different from other philosophies and other religions, and it's that they're all word-based, that you
Mm,
you hear the word and you speak the word, whereas you look at, Plato, it was understanding things with the mind's eye, or, Eastern religions, there's a lot of meditation, but in this Judeo-Christian tradition, there's such a thing on the word. And as we all know,
mm,
in the beginning was the word and the word was God. And so
yeah.
again, yes, we're talking about the Bible. Yes, we're talking about the biblical word, but I think we're also talking about what you hear and what you speak in general. And I think Satan tries to silence that. And so a lot of my classes, or to beginning are just, you know, talking again about identity, about the call that God has for you to write. So many people feel that they've had a word given to them or God's called them, and yet that was in the past and they haven't written a single word. It's just
Mm,
there in their head. And so it's getting people used to, let's just start writing. And, from there, someone can help you, I can help you, another editor can help you organize it. But if God has called you to write something, if he's called you to share something, and it's not just our personal stories, our people perish for lack of knowledge. My people
mm,
perish for lack of knowledge. So sometimes it's something, in a non-fictional realm, something where he's given you a piece of wisdom that is to share. Fiction as well. I mean, I remember reading, C.S. Lewis is one people bring up all the time, but he had such an impact on my life in reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and
mm.
knowing, who Aslan was, and how wonderful this lion was. Even as a kid, without anyone telling me, I'm just like, oh, this is like Jesus. And you know Jesus is good, Aslan was good, and I'm making those comparisons. So fiction too is a way of speaking, God's message. And
Yeah.
sometimes, even as Jesus used the parables, sometimes fiction can do it in a way that testimony and, nonfiction can't do. So that's another area. But really seeing that Christians are more inhibited. And so I really try to break those
Mm.
barriers. And that's one of the things the ministry tries to do, is to just get people sharing. And so that's the biggest point on that in John, in 1720 Ministries. So
Oh, well, that's wonderful.
yeah.
And, like, what is, uh, like, one of the things that you have seen in coaching writers, like, as far as, like, how to motivate them or inspire them, or getting from here, from the brain down through the pen or through the fingers and the typing, like what is, like, one, uh, you
Yeah.
know, kind of coaching tip have you shared with them to kind of get it out?
It doesn't happen immediately. And that's one of the things too.
Mm,
It's like people, expect, like, okay, there's going to be this immediate thing and I'll write my whole book. And it's like, don't worry about writing your whole book. Worry about, getting the point that you have today out on the page. And so,
mm,
um, encouraging them to just do that sometimes it's not even the pen and paper, recording yourself. So many people, like
mm,
even this, I've told you this story. I've told the story of my testimony before. I've been recorded before. And sometimes we don't think, like, oh, if you just transcribe that, you've got a lot of pages right there. And yeah,
yeah.
you might need to polish it, you might need to fix it, but just getting them that voice to be released. And
Mm,
I'll look in scripture, I'll show them, Moses did not want to go and talk. God actually had to get Aaron to speak for him. But look what happened from what Moses and Aaron's ministry, that things, I mean, they went into, they led the people out of Egypt. We
mm,
have probably Moses, wrote those books, the 5 books of the, New Testament, at least parts of it. There was the Old Testament, the Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and
yeah.
so, this whole thing came from that. So showing them examples to get them writing, and then being really patient. When
Mm,
I went to my master's, my thesis was on John the Baptist, and I was really drawn to that whole idea of a voice crying in the wilderness. And so
mm,
sometimes it feels like you're all alone out there. It feels like I don't know how to be that voice. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. And so often, again, our voices have been squelched, and I think that's what drew
Mm,
me, is feeling through a lot of traumatic incidents in my life and my family, and just feeling like I didn't have a voice. Realizing that I did, and so being able to
mm,
even share that with my students, and seeing that, like, I understand where you're coming from. This isn't someone who's saying it's easy. I know it can be hard, and I know it can be really scary to share what you're saying. So even having these small groups, like having a class of, 5 or 6, or starting like that, where they get used to sharing what they have to say and seeing the feedback. So that's one of the things. I hold an online class once a month, and have been taking people in, and having the feedback from others that's constructive and
mm,
positive, and welcoming. That has really helped with people. But they go from there, and I've seen people end up self-publishing their books. In my secular classes, I've had a couple of people that have gone through traditional publishers and gotten
wow.
published. So you see them start. Everybody starts as these little voices, and then all of a sudden there's a book, and it's out there, and it's going forward. So I have seen that happen. But again, it takes some time. And it takes some work. I think that's the other thing, is writing really is work, and no book just comes from beginning to end. In fact,
Mm,
sometimes where you start writing is in the middle, and then you figure out what the beginning and
mm.
the end is. But again, you can't do that until you start writing it and putting it down.
Yeah,
So
kind of flushing it out, kind of,
mhm.
just starting with this, what is in your mind initially, not necessarily saying, okay, what should I write at the beginning or write should I at the end? Just write something, right?
Right,
And it sounds like
exactly.
you need to be easy on yourself when you're writing. Don't put too much pressure on yourself when writing. So, wow, that's some really great, well, practical
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah, and it is,
uh,
that is the truth, is that it's that pressure that we all
mm,
we all do. We all put it there, and we all think like, "Oh, you look at like Randy Clark's book, and you think that he just sat down at the beginning, and he wrote it all to the end." And that's just not how it happens. The writers that are published would be the first ones to tell you that this isn't what you do, that you
mm.
have to just do the work, and again, be easy on yourself, like you're saying. So, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Now, can you take us back from your testimony, what you're just sharing? For those that are struggling and receiving their healing, right? Like what? Because you had this whole journey.
Yeah.
It sounds like a lot of years in kind of
Yeah.
navigating that all that healing. But like, what would you share with someone who is believing God for the healing, but they haven't seen that healing be fully manifested yet in their body?
Yeah, and that's really interesting because, my mom, and even from what I've shared with you so far, I think you could tell she's been such an influence on my life. And, I mean, always growing up, because my parents, sang in church. My dad was a lay minister, so he
Wow.
preached, for many years, and yet we had a lot of issues going on, legal things, different things in the family. And anytime I had a quick question, my mom would never let Jesus be the one that was attacked. It was always like, well,
Mm,
that's people, that's church, that's not Jesus. You can't, it's okay to be angry at him, but you can't, you gotta work, you gotta wrestle with him. You can't let go of Jesus. And so that was always how she was. And yet,
mm,
she's I one of the things I do is help take care of her, because she's very handicapped. She has osteoarthritis throughout her body, and just
mm,
severely. And so she can get up a little bit with a walker, but pretty much wheelchair bound. And
mm,
and I'm like, God, why? Because she has believed, she's the
mm,
one. I'm the reason I believe in her, because of I believe in you because of her. And so why is she like this? And so I
mm,
understand it from both points of view. I mean, I had at that one point like an instant healing. The other point, it was more medical, but it was still, I believe God gave wisdom to the intern. And yet here's my mom, and she's not healed. And it's
mm,
interesting because the at Global, that second year, we prepare a message, and then you can go out and give that perhaps at the services. They have you tour around. And mine was actually on that passage, the man at the Pool of Bethesda.
Oh.
And all my life, whenever anyone talked about that passage, I always heard them being very accusatory of that man. He's been there by the pool for,
Mm,
all these years. And, why didn't he get healed? And Jesus even comes to him and says something, to that effect, or why, you know, why aren't you healed or something? I can't remember what he says. But anyway, and I felt like, wait a minute, that's just not like Jesus. Jesus isn't
mm,
accusatory um, to someone who needs compassion. And so I always felt that even then, he was letting his man share his pain, share his story, because the man starts to say, I couldn't get healed because I couldn't get to the water. I had no one to bring me. And you had to be the first one there. And that's what I think, we often don't get is it wasn't just getting to that water. You had to be there when it got stirred. You had to be the first one there. And this man is completely crippled. He had no one to bring him there. All these other people are trying to get there first. And I
mm,
think it gave him a chance to share his story. Again, I go back to the story, but he got to share his pain, his woundedness, that I've been here all these years. And then what does Jesus say? You're healed. Now I heal you. And he looked at him with compassion, and he understood that story. And so I feel like, whether you're waiting for healing, or whether you get it instantly, that Jesus understands. And that's part of why he came in human form, was to understand. I mean, I think that God, that was part of it, that Jesus really did bridge that gap between heaven and earth in coming partially as a human. And I know there's all the rest of it, his shed blood, saving us from sin, but there was something to God being able to understand us too, and through that. And so, I think that keep keep wrestling with him, keep, going to him, asking him, just don't let go of him, because he's not letting go of you. And so I think that that's really important. And don't, even when it's long, to not lose that faith, or at least that desire,
mm,
to have that faith. Sometimes, yeah, when you wake up in pain, I can see my mom's like got tears in her eyes, but
mm,
but she still keeps saying, talking to him. She's never lost her love of him. And I just I think that's the most important thing. And with me, I
mm.
put myself in places that were anointed. Even when I didn't want to go to that service, I still went. And so
Yeah.
that's another thing too, that don't give up and just isolate yourself. Put yourself in
Mm,
places where you see God is working. Put yourself in places where there's healing. I think of Joanne Moody's testimony, where
mm,
here she was in these meetings, and Dr. Clark's praying for people, and she's just sitting in the back like, oh, please don't have anyone pray for me again, because I've been through this so often. And then this one man prays for her, and that was the answer.
mm.
God moved through him. So you never know, and it may not come the way you expect, but Jesus is a healer. And so, don't let go of that. Is my
Yeah,
best.
yeah, that's amen. Yeah, it's amazing that your mom, her love for God, has continued to remain strong despite
Yeah.
her health challenges
Yeah.
and what she's going through. And that just shows the authenticity of her faith, right? Because
Yes.
she's not letting that deter her relationship with God despite what she's going
Right.
through. And I'm
Yeah.
sure that was the same case with you as well, with what you have gone through. So
Yeah.
you really love to see other people kind of bring about their story and their testimony from pen to paper. Like, why is it so important for people to communicate their testimony on paper or digital paper, or
Yeah.
put it in a document
Put it in a
form?
document.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the interesting things when you look at the Bible, right? We have the written word.
Hmm.
So, somebody thought it was really important to compile those stories of what Jesus had done and that history into written word. And that's why we're able, yes, it could have spread orally. Yes, you could have had it out there, but
Mm,
but would we have it? And there's even places in the Bible where, people are instructed to write it down. Make sure that you have it written down. And so you will remember, so that your children will see this, that it's documented. So many things today. We have legal documents with our names signed to them. It's not just a handshake and a smile. That there's
mm,
something that gives it weight when there's a document, and something that certainly lasts beyond ourselves, that lasts
mm,
longer. And so I think that there's that. But I keep trying to find a doctoral program that combines like religion and writing the way my master's program did, because I would love the time to explore
mm,
all those even further. One of the things in my secular classes that I'd gone to, I went to one class with a teacher that I loved, but she
mm,
said, "Why do we write?" And she says, "Well, all writing is really dealing with the fact that we all die. It's really dealing with death."
mm.
And I thought, "Oh, that's horrible." I mean, and then I thought, well, that's not the case, because of what Jesus did on the cross. He redeemed us. And
Mm,
actually he redeemed all of us, right? It's just that you have the ability to believe that and go forward to heaven and believe it, or you can deny it. But he still died for redemption. And so to
mm,
me, our story now is not a story of death. Humanity's story now is a story of redemption, if we choose to accept that. And so I think that that's another reason that's so important to write that down, to let the devil wants us to think it's a story of death, but
mm,
that's not what it is. The original story in that garden was a beautiful story, and the story after Jesus, that's a beautiful story. And yes, there's all this messiness in between, but writing it down, letting people read that and have a document to look at and say, okay, this is important. I'm gonna understand that this is redeeming, and this
mm.
is why. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the reasons that drives me, is to just let people know we're redeemed. This death story isn't our story anymore. So
Yeah, that's a really good point that you make, and putting it into a greater understanding, not just from someone's particular philosophy of
yeah.
opinion about how that's done, but looking from a that larger biblical overview. Now, I believe you've written some books. Can you share with us what you have written?
So actually, I have not. I'm in the process
Oh,
of
I
writing.
I, I thought you did.
I
Okay,
have
sorry.
I have no, but that's okay, because I have written, I've been a freelance writer for years. So I have written for so many different magazines. In fact, I laugh
Mm,
because the first thing when people looked me up, I used to be an article on toilets. They used to come up. So
really?
I'm like, yeah, I don't think that's the case anymore. But I used to write
Oh
on I
my!
used to say everything but the kitchen sink. And actually I've written on the kitchen sink too. So I had
Wow.
done I used to do all these articles. And then so right now, I before I went to ministry school, I and again, because I felt called into ministry but didn't really understand it, I decided to interview all these pastors, and they were mostly pastors I met through those Hawaiian missions trips. So a lot of
Mm,
Pentecostal pastors, um, and I started to get their stories. And so I wrote half of it before ministry school, and then when you're in ministry school, there just wasn't time, to finish it. Um and and I know people make lots of excuses, but honestly, like, that ministry school had me very busy. So I'm writing that now and finishing that now, and so that should be coming out soon. And then the other
oh,
book
that's
that I'm
exciting.
yeah, and the other book I've been working on is actually some of what we're talking about today. So
Oh, okay,
talking about
great.
talking about that need to write, and why we should do that. And so trying to get that out there as well. So but I have so many, there's a memoir in me somewhere, and that's like one of the things I love to teach too, is
Mm,
memoir writing. So these are all definitely things that are going forward. But I've been so driven by teaching all these years that
mm.
that again, to set my time, making a living freelancing, teaching it's kept a lot of the time from writing. But I definitely want to get those books out, because again, I feel that it's important, and I feel like it's important to let my students know that yes, I've done this too. I've brought it to completion, that I'm not just making excuses. So those are very, like, I'm driven to get that done, and hopefully really soon.
Oh, well, that's really
Yeah.
something to look forward to and exciting. I can't wait to read
Ah.
those books. And I've always wondered, like, when it comes to writing, like, kind of like your process, but also like, for me, I find when I'm, putting words down, I can, bring it out with my fingers and with typing. When I'm trying to write, I feel like my brain is much further ahead than my hand is when I'm
Oh,
writing.
that's so interesting.
Yeah, like what is some of your thoughts as far as like, um, you know, putting it from brain through, to paper or digital paper?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
is it best to use your pen and paper and go through that, tedious, slow process? Or, I
It's
mean, maybe that's different for some people, but for me,
right.
that's case. Or
Well,
is it better just to type? Or what are your thoughts on all that?
that's the thing, and everybody's and it sounds so cliche in a way, but everybody's got to do what's right for them. And I think that one of the
Okay.
things that's hard is that there's all these books you'll find about writing, or you'll find, and everybody's like, oh, I've got to do my morning pages, and I've got to write, for whatever it says, 20 minutes or an hour. And,
Mm,
Stephen King, he gets up and he writes every day, and, from this time to this time. So that's what I
mm.
have to do. And when, again, it puts that pressure on people, like, oh my
Oh,
gosh, today I didn't do it. I failed. And well, maybe they're not a
mm,
morning person. I'm not a morning person. And so, to me, if I tried to write in the morning, it would probably be unreadable. I don't get going until later in the day. So, and so finding out what works for you. You can try those things, and sometimes it's an experiment. Like for a week, I'm going to try this, or for a month, I'm going to try this. But find out what works for you. And so when it comes to like your brain and that, I I always have to start, like even my articles, I start like the first sentences or two on paper. And I'll have lots of
mm,
scratches where I'll try to figure out like what is it that I'm trying to say. And then I'm like you, I go to the computer, and
mm.
after that first sentence or two, I just can type. And it's like you said, it's almost like in your fingers, or your fingers are moving fast enough for your brain or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's how I found I can write so much better. For many years they'd
Mm,
be like, "Oh, write it on the page." Well, I'd have so many things scratched out and so many things. I'm like, "Where is it?" I'm trying to look at this and try to figure it
yeah.
out. But I know there's other people that really love that feeling of the paper and the pen, and that's how they were brought up. That's how they think. And so that helps
Hmm.
them. So my thing is find what works for you. And I do say just right. So even if it's 5 minutes once a week, or if it's 5 minutes every day, or if it's 10 minutes here, do what works, but do it. And so that's the thing. You don't have to be anybody else. Sometimes it's just, again, recording it. Some people in their car can just turn on their phone and record themselves thinking out loud.
Hmm.
And it does don't expect it to be pretty. It doesn't have to be pretty. You can figure out pretty later. Just get something down on the page. And so,
Mm.
yeah, that's where I start with everybody. And as people get going, then they're definitely, I mean, as you get something on the page, yeah, then we have to struggle to find the beginning. You have to, I'll work with people that I'm working with to, okay, is this the beginning? Is this what you need to do? Now you need to figure out an end. I'll do that,
Mm,
but it's getting them started that's the hardest part. And so that's why,
mm.
I say find what's easiest. Try it on the computer and see if that helps. A lot of people have thought that it's pen and paper and have never really tried to write a piece on the computer. And I think I was like that when I first started.
Oh.
When I first started writing, the computer. I was in school. Computers were really just coming on the scene.
Mm,
And so when I eventually started doing this as a career and started writing, I'm like, oh no, I have to do pen and paper. And one day I just sat down at the computer and I thought, oh my gosh, this is so much easier. This works for me. And so I think it's discovering that. So don't be stuck in one mindset. Try it, but then do what works best for you. Don't try to be like somebody else. So
yeah, that's some really great advice, right?
yeah,
Don't try to pigeonhole yourself into what works for someone and it may not work for you. It sounds like consistency is key, but don't try to model
right,
thinking that what they will do will work exactly how it does for them. You kind of
right,
have to just learn as you go, right? And what
right,
works for you, but still maintain that just that consistency without that pressure, putting
right.
on
And
yourself, right?
could even be different from book to book. Some books might just flow out of you onto the computer, and others maybe there's a little bit more struggling. Maybe you have to turn to the pen and paper. So again, don't worry if you change in the process. A lot of times I'll tell people, when they're writing like essays, like if I have a class and I'm asking them for, a 5-page essay, oftentimes the paragraph they started with, they can get rid of after, your first paragraph is you trying to find what the story's about. And if you lop off that first paragraph, you'll find you're right in the story. And it's the same thing when you're writing a book. You got to get the garbage down on the page to begin with, and that's why I said, don't expect it to be pretty at first, but that's okay. And that being kind to yourself through the process is a big part of it. And you're learning what your voice is as you're going along. You're learning what it is you have to say as you write it. I mean, what we're talking about here, there's things that I'm learning that I haven't said before. And so again, those are important things to remember for, when I go to write it down, like, oh, we talked about this, maybe that is something, and do a little research on it and figure that out. So yeah.
Yeah, that's that's really good. I'm wondering, is there any uh, people who are writers or authors where like you have learned from, gleaned from, or different
I'm looking
aspect?
around because I
Yeah.
usually have my books right here, because I usually I do recommend certain ones to people. There's a woman, I think it's Jennifer Miskoff, who wrote from Bethel School. She went there and she
Oh,
wrote
okay.
a book. She has like a handbook on writing. And so she'll have some like, kind of prompts, but like things that are more directed. So things like, considering your audience, considering, if you
Oh.
had one thing to say. So she does a really good job with that. One of the books that I love is Walking on Water by Madeleine L'Engle. And she's the woman that wrote A Wrinkle in Time. So again,
Oh, okay.
writing these children's books, but she's in this book, she's talking about faith and art, and talking about how there's good art and there's bad art. So not talking about, is this thing necessarily like again, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right? You have a witch in it. So many people, I remember even when I was a kid, they were like, oh, should Christians kids be reading this? Well, it's a whole book about God and Christianity and the devil, and so that it wasn't evil, it was beautiful representation of that. And so she'll talk about how there's good art, so that's good art, and then there's bad art. So it's not so much the subject, but looking at it and seeing, is Christ's message going forth in it. But she just does that book is just beautiful on the writing process. And and she talks about it sort of as a writer goes out. It's sort of like, when Peter gets first called out on the water to walk on water, and so there's a scariness at when you first go to do it, when you first go to speak and deliver your message. It can be very fearful. And again, if we start focusing on ourselves, right, you fail. You can't walk on the water. But if you have Christ first and you're looking towards him and you're looking at what you're trying to produce for him, that's part of that process, and that's part of what the writing is. So she was so influential when I first started writing and looking at that. So that's just a beautiful book that I recommend. There's a lot of, because I teach memoir and I teach things, there's a lot of books that aren't necessarily Christian per se, but just,
Yeah, that's okay.
Writing the Sacred Journey, but by Elizabeth Andrew. She has a lot of prompts that are good, and she's writing. It's more from a spiritual perspective, not necessarily a Christian perspective. But the prompts are good, and sometimes you're like saying, okay, well, I've got an idea for a book. Why do I need a prompt? But sometimes having a prompt helps you, skip that empty page, and maybe it's not. Maybe it doesn't look at first like it has anything to do with your book, but sometimes, like I'm saying, if you sit down and that day you really don't know what to write about, maybe open up a book and find a prompt and just start, maybe transform it to your message. So the prompt might ask you, what's the defining sound of your childhood? That's one that I use a lot in my memoir class. But, think about your healing. What was the defining sound the day that you got healed, or the day, I walked up? What did I hear when that evangelist called me forward? And if I start writing about that, changing the prompt slightly to focus with my material, sometimes that can really help. So going through a book and just slightly looking at the prompt from what you want to write about, can give you some material. So that's, there's lots and lots of books with prompts on it where you can find it. In our testimonies and our memoirs are basically, a lot of people think about autobiography and they think like it's from the beginning of your life to the end of your life. And I actually heard someone come to, I think it was JB Galloway came to the school and
Oh yeah.
sort of said, don't write your memoirs if that's for someone who's, like Dr. Clark. That's not for the average person. But again, I think he's looking at it from that perspective of autobiography. And most of the time, if you're writing all these facts about your life, it's usually someone we want to read about, the celebrity or a politician. But memoirs, just like a slice of life. It's just sharing, your testimony. It's not really the same thing as an autobiography with all these details of your whole life. It's sharing something you've been through and telling, because you've been through it, how can someone else get through it? So it fits so well with Christians' testimonies. I mean, it's really the same thing. And so there's so many books on memoir that you can just pick up,
Mm.
writing life stories. This one that I have here, Bill Rohrbach, it will start giving you prompts on how to organize your memoir. And it's just this is
Wow.
one of the better ones. And he'll tell you, if you want to revise, how do you revise? And so that's like something I
Mm.
ask, say, for beginners or people that have never started at all. It's a great place to go and do that, is to use that book, because sometimes we don't know. Finding a writer's group. I mean, these are all things that you hear, but it's so important to have a community that is
Mm.
listening to you. They're representative of the larger audience that's out there. And so to
Mm.
get feedback from others, to get just that encouragement, like, I didn't write this week. Did you write? Why didn't you? This happened to me. That it really helps.
Mm.
Finding a writer's coach can help. Just all these things where you don't feel like that solitary voice in the wilderness, where you feel
Mm.
like there's someone there and they can echo back to you, the struggles and the triumphs. I mean, when people get published, it's so exciting, not just for that individual, but for the whole group, and if they can do the book, then maybe I can do it too, because I've seen all the problems they've had. So I definitely encourage, um, to not do it in isolation, but at the same time, to be selective in who you choose to be that audience, because you don't
Mm.
need, a discouraging voice, especially if you're someone who's
Mm.
been traumatized or had discouraging voices. You want to find someone that you feel that you can work with, that is encouraging.
Mm.
It's not false praise, it's encouragement. And so it's like that you feel comfortable with them giving you some feedback. And then,
Mm.
learning to develop a tougher skin, that there can be rejection out there. Not everybody's gonna like everything. Not everybody liked Jesus's message, but that's okay. So you have to learn to develop that along the way too. But at first, find encouragement and find voices that are gonna they're really going to help you get somewhere. They're going to help you move towards getting your book or your blog post or your essay out there. So yeah.
Wow, those are a tremendous amount of resources to put on your writer's tool belt. I think it's going to
Yeah.
help, every writer, even those that want to become even better writers as well. Wow,
Yeah.
that's amazing. And for those that don't necessarily have photographic memory of their life and want to write a memoir, like, what are some of the things that like you found worked with other writers, perhaps, when it comes to trying to unpack some of the life experiences that they have had to write out a memoir?
Right. So again, what I said, those
All,
writing
all those
prompts,
things help. Okay,
all
yeah.
those writing prompts, because you know,
I'm just thinking out loud. Yeah.
yeah, they'll get you. I mean, and not just focusing, like, sensory images sometimes are the biggest thing, and we're so visually focused. But
Mm.
thinking, how did something smell at that moment? How did something sound?
Mm.
Going through, like, sort of there's a writer, Abigail Thomas, who writes a memoir that I love, and she'll talk about going through the side door of memory. So that's a lot of what
Oh.
these prompts do, is sort of they take you in the side door, and then
Mm.
once you're in, a lot of these things start to flow. And that's why I say
Wow.
sometimes, you're lopping off the first couple of paragraphs, because it's not until you've been writing for a little bit that you start to get
Hmm.
there. But definitely, picking up one of those books, and that's why, again, that one I just recommended, he has a lot. He'll maybe say, start with making a map of where you grew up, your community. What
Mm.
was, what was down the street from you? What was here? What were the sounds that you heard from the window when you're listening? And you start writing about those, and you'll start getting back to that time, and then things will come
Mm.
easier. So that's what I would suggest is, and if it's something specific, again, you can tailor it to that. So say you don't want to get the the childhood, say you want to start with, again, the day you were saved, or the day you were healed, or
Mm.
where were you, what was the place, were you in a church, were you out in nature, was it a forest, where were the trees, or did you walk down the path? Start creating that
Mm.
map, maybe start talking about what happened just before and what happened after, and then it'll get you into that moment. So you can tailor the prompts. You don't necessarily have to, too. You can use them just as they are, but sometimes people are like, oh, I want to work towards what I'm working at. So then, okay, just fix it. And that's what we'll do in my workshops, is a lot of times, I'll give a prompt, but I'll say to them, you don't have to write me and say, oh, I couldn't do this prompt this week, or
Mm.
I wrote something else, or is it okay to write something else? It's okay. You're using this to kind of get in, use your door. So it may be the side door, maybe the back door. You're using it to get to where you need to go. So it's okay to tailor them however you want, but just write something. So that's how we work in the workshops.
Right. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense now. Thank you
Mhm.
for explaining that. And
Yeah.
so, where can people learn more about Kim and
Yeah.
your writing coach, services and just everything you have to offer? Where can they learn more about you?
Sure. So I have a website, kimjgifford.com, I think, or maybe it's kimjaninegifford.com. I don't even know my own website. You can also look up under 1720 Ministries, and that's 1720 written out. Um, that's just getting started, so it's not as great a website yet, but that they can certainly go on. My email is a great way to reach me. So
Mm.
Kimby, KIMBI 802@gmail.com. And so if people have questions, if there's something you want my services, that's definitely on my websites as well. But it's just, you can contact me directly, if you don't want to go there. But the website, Kim Janine Gifford, it has, I'm an artist too. I've done a lot of things. So you see a lot of things, but the main thing says just Kim. And that's because my
Mm.
mom named me Kim instead of Kimberly. And so all my life I've had to say, I'm just Kim. And but I thought, because there's all these different abilities God gave me,
Mm.
and it's even religion and writing, right? I've had a hard time finding a program that really combines both in life, and
Mm.
so I was able to self-design one. But it's those things that there's God's given so many different talents, so many different ways of worshiping him, of encouraging other people to worship and share their stories and come to him. And so I love that it's just Kim, that this encompasses everything. So yeah.
Well, very good. Well, you guys, you heard it. You can contact Kim at her email or visit her website and learn more about all the writing, coaching services that she has to offer, and coaching group, I believe,
Yeah.
too. Right? You were mentioning earlier in your podcast with that
Yes.
accountability piece as
Yeah.
well. So, is there anything else you want to share before we close?
No, I think that's great, John, and thank you so much for the opportunity to share. I know we've been trying to do this for a long time, but
Yeah.
it was really fun to just talk with you too, and
Yes.
explain, what I've been doing. So, I appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah, you're very welcome. Thank you again for being on Talks with Gallagher. And so, yeah, those inspiring writers, those writers that feel like they're stuck, this is the episode that you need to share with them to get unstuck, and to just move forward and see the importance of writing and bringing it out to the surface, especially us believers today.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, well, on that note, thank you everyone for watching and listening. Talks with